Hello, Deacon Eric here. Well, let's get into it. So, even this morning, I just saw a little ad for Peterson Academy. Sounds like Jordan Peterson's kind of starting to feel better. He's posting stuff, but whatever. The ad, he was speaking, he has got a class coming out or something about Nietzsche. I just kind of saw it, a clip of it, and it just, got me thinking. And Jordan Peterson himself, he has an interesting kind of relationship with Nietzsche because he sees positive things and negative things, and sometimes there's certain Nietzsche quotes that I like, right? Whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I think that's a Nietzschean quote. But it got me thinking because what's been on my heart just recently and just kind of in general, my heart really goes out to young people, especially young men, because I'm a man. But my heart goes out to young women because I have daughters. And I think, though, the key in any culture is to go after the young men, because if you get the young men, you will capture the heart of the whole culture. That seems to be how history moves. And the enemy is doing a number on young men these days, but there's good signs as well. If you pay attention, that's the thing. If you only pay attention to what's online and what's kind of out there in the open, it seems to be only negative. And young men especially, are being attacked from the left and the right. But at the heart of it is this nihilism or nothingness, right? That nothing matters, basically. And it can be a little discouraging to see that on young men's hearts. And it's on the right and the left. But the reason that the Jordan Peterson talking about Nietzsche made me think about it, and there's several books about this, or several things when you look into it that make sense, is that we are still today being affected by thinkers like Nietzsche, even though many of the things he said obviously have been proven wrong. And when you look back at the end of the 19th century, going into the early 20th century, the thinking of Nietzsche and Freud, Marx, and even Darwin, I think that is, and others like that, those kind of philosophies is what brought about the bloodshed in the 20th century and the mass psychosis that's going on in this century. And so when you look at those things, it's people listening to these ideas is part of the problem. Now, all of those thinkers came out of kind of the end of Enlightenment thinking, and at the heart of it is a godlessness, which is why the Nietzsche part is the most interesting, because Nietzsche, more than any other, came out and claimed that God is dead and we killed him. That was his saying. And Peterson keys in on that sometimes. I've heard him talk about it, because he's kind of saying Nietzsche as this prophet in one sense, not in truth, but that he was putting the onus on us, right, on humanity. That's what Nietzsche was trying to say, was that God's not really there, and now it's on us. And he didn't view God as real. Now, the problem with guys like Nietzsche and guys like Freud and Marx is they're all crazy. You look at their personal lives, they're crazy. I mean, Nietzsche killed himself. I mean, he totally lost it. He went totally nuts in the end. And I've read some interesting things. Is the reason anything that we even have of Nietzsche survives is because of his wicked sister. And it was a sister that propagated this stuff. And the reason this stuff is important is because we throw around terms. You hear them all the time. Oh, you're a fascist. You're a Nazi. You're this, you're that, and the other. Well, I think you can't understand what real fascism is and what real Nazism is without Nietzsche. Nietzsche is key, right? Because Nietzsche's whole idea was that God is dead and that humanity needs to evolve. And so Nietzsche really was a cultural, a social Darwinist, I want to say. So culturally, he was into social Darwinism. And so social Darwinism and even Marx's ideas, right? So in Nazi Germany, you had the communists and you had the Nazis in the end. But they were both influenced by these. But for the Nazis, even more was this idea of Nietzsche's Übermensch, or the Superman, right? And not Superman of the comics, which even that is based on Nietzsche's idea. It's a positive spin, is that this Superman would show up. And so Superman comics is this fictional version, is that this kind of Superman is kind of this messiah figure that to bring about a golden age, which is obviously ridiculous. But obviously I believe that there is a Übermensch that came at one time and that he's coming again. I do believe in the Superman. His name is Jesus. He already came and he's coming again. But he came in a very different way. He didn't come in as a strong man. He came in the weakness of human flesh, but he defeated death by death. He is the great warrior. But the Nazis had this idea of the Übermensch, the Superman, the Führer, the leader was going to come. It already existed. And then Hitler takes that spotlight and says, it's me. I'm the one that's talking about. I'm the Führer, and I'm going to lead us into... He didn't necessarily claim to be the Übermensch, the Superman, but he claimed to be the Führer that would lead about the rising up of the German people as the Übermensch, as the Supermen. And so it was this weird kind of nationalist, racial, social Darwinism. And so communism has very similar things, except it was, it wasn't nationalist. It was it was a universal idea. They wanted to take over the world in that way, but it did exist, and it still exists today. Right? It's the idea of, that's what's going on even in Russia right now, is that all their religion, all their stuff is about the glory of Russia and the Russian Empire. It's all about that stuff. It's all comes down to pride and godlessness. And that really is the key, is because if you think that God is dead, or you think that God doesn't exist, right, which is what Darwin, Marx, Nietzsche, all these guys thought, Freud, they're all living in a world where God doesn't exist, where the fear of God does not exist. And the fear of the Lord, the fear of Yahweh, is the beginning of wisdom. And so that's the thing. Nietzsche, Darwin, Marx, Freud, and others, and philosophies that lead to eugenics, right? Eugenics is at the key to this stuff, right? And eugenics is what's behind Planned Parenthood and those kind of things. So these kind of philosophies, these ideas, is what down the line opens us up to trans ideology and transhumanism and all this other malarkey that's going on. It's a lack of the fear of the Lord. And that's what it comes down to. If you don't fear the Lord, it leads to your destruction. And the Lord says, I'll give you eventually what you want. But it all is unto his ends. Right? So that's the thing. None of that's true. God does exist. But he's humble and he doesn't get up in your face. But if you look through history, you see these ideas and you see the enemy at work. That's how he sowed the seeds. It wasn't that he just outright attacked God. He just took God out of the foundations of our culture. And so that's my problem with even some of the Western traditionalists. There's this thing rising up called traditionalism. And if we're not careful, it will lead to Nazism. A form of it, right? It won't be called that, but that's what you're getting. Is you'll even have it. That's the thing about Nazism, is it had a church on its face. That's the same thing going on in Russia. They've got church leaders, right? They're the highest leader. They're all part of they're all like ex-KGB agents and all this stuff. They're all embedded in the government and things. And it's just cockamamie ideas. And so you can see all that and go, well, what hope do we have? And so it can lead to another kind of nihilism. How can we combat that when it's so prevalent in the culture? But what does Jesus say? He says, don't give in to fear. If I didn't return, if I didn't cut the day short, it would destroy everything. But he will cut the days short. God will only allow it to a point. That's the thing. And on the other note, what we do see is the same generation of young men, the ones that live online, and they get in these echo chambers where they don't see. They're getting sucked over to the left, and they're getting pulled into the trans stuff, and they're going crazy, and they're dangerous. They really are. And then there's a whole other group that they think they need to fight in a certain way to preserve the culture, but there's this little carrot in front of their face pulling them this other way, and they're listening to people, conspiracy theorists is one way you want to call them. I believe there's conspiracies, but I think these things are the conspiracy. The stuff on the left and the stuff on the right. It is the powers of darkness, the principalities and the powers above, conspiring against humanity and leading our young people into lies and leading our governments into lies. It's all this stuff. It's all lies. And it is a conspiracy against humanity. But then you got guys, guys like Tucker getting sucked into Russian propaganda. And when you get into it, right, there's all this stuff. Iran is at the heart of it, because Russia and China, they'll work together when it's to their advantage. And at the heart, the key is Iran, because they want the power to shift over to their side, away from America. They know they can't take all the power, but in a multipolar world, they can have more power. And if they have Iran, and it's this weird, nonsensical amalgamation of communism and Islam, and then from the Russian perspective, it's this perverted, heretical Russian Orthodoxy right? That doesn't mean that every Russian Orthodox believer is a heretic, but there are heretics at the helm in Russia. Absolutely. And so all the stuff, right? Yes, Russia, Ukraine, Iran, all the stuff is the Ukraine. This is all proxies and different stuff going on. And then the troubles going on in Europe and in the U.S. and all over the world. It's all the enemy above plotting with rulers on earth and cultural influencers on earth to what? Rage against the Lord. It's Psalms 2. But if they plot in vain, it'll all come to nothing. It could destroy the United States, which would be a sad thing for the world. Absolutely. But in the end, the Lord laughs with derision. And if you have the fear of the Lord, you'll be all right. You will be just fine, no matter what happens. That's the thing. If I look at it, I can even feel overwhelmed, and fearful. Not because of myself. I'm good. I feel quite secure, but I have kids, and so that, my concern is for them. But I can't protect them from it, but I can prepare them for it, and I have to be aware of it. And so we need to study these things, be aware of these things, but not get sucked into the rabbit hole in these things, and just constantly be feeding on it and looking at it and be fearful. Let's step back. Let's get in the Word, because it's all here. This tells you. It literally says, don't give into conspiracies. Don't be afraid of them. It says the nations will plot against the Lord, and the Lord laughs with derision. Jesus says wars and rumors of wars and nation against nation and people against people and all this other stuff, all this coming and going and this turmoil and tribulation, it'll all come to nothing. And so, yes, I think Islam is dangerous. I think the stuff with playing around with Russia is dangerous, and China is dangerous. I think the radicalism on the left and the right in the U.S. and in Europe is dangerous. It's all dangerous for humanity. But it'll all come to nothing in the end. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the fear of the Lord is clean and pure, and will purify your heart, purify your mind. And it'll give you strength, it'll give you peace to not be overcome by the schemes of the enemy. It'll all come to nothing. They couldn't defeat the Lord of glory when he became a man. They couldn't even kill him. They couldn't hold him in the grave. If they can't hold mankind in the grave, what are they going to do? Even death will be defeated. Absolutely. And this isn't just fantasy. I've touched it. I've tasted it in my own life. I have a peace that you don't see online. I want that for you. And so, get in the Word. Get in the fear of the Lord. It is your only freedom. And if you have a mind to, you don't have to read everything, but begin to understand. Read some Nietzsche, understand Marx, understand Darwin, and these others, and Freud, and just how they've influenced the society. Then you'll begin to understand. This is why history and philosophy matter, because it helps you understand how we got here, right? And how we've, since the medieval period, how we've gone down this rabbit hole. But there was corruption back then too. There was reasons things happened. But we get in the Word, if we get into church history, and we tap into, if we reconnect to our roots, but at the heart of it, if we get back into the fear of the Lord and the power of the cross, if we get rid of our crossless gospel, if we get rid of our Christianese that removes the fear of the Lord and removes the judgment of the Lord, if we get away from that and we get into the Word, we get into the truth of the gospel, we meet the God who confronts our own troubles, we won't have to give into fear. We won't have to give into these vain philosophies. We can laugh with derision alongside God because we have kissed the Son and He's real. That's the key. And that's my prayer for some of these others like Jordan Peterson, that they don't just talk about Western civilization and that we need, a return to that. We need an actual return to the fear of the Lord. That is what has made America great. That is what has made Western civilization great, was that we had the fear of the Lord. That's it. We had the gospel and the fear of the Lord. And that's what made the greatest civilization that's ever existed. That's what brings about peace and prosperity for humanity. Because it's pro-human. Because it's pro-God. Because if you get God's perspective, then you see your fellow man from God's perspective. And you are saddened when people go astray. You don't get happy when they die, when they destroy themselves. You're burdened by it in a good way, but you have a place to take your burden. It's the only path to true happiness and true peace. And in the end, life forevermore. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He shine His face upon you and give you His shalom.